The year is 1823, a time when the American wilderness was not a map of states, but a vast, silent dominion of untamed danger. Survival was measured not in days, but in breaths. This is the story of Hugh Glass, a name etched into the brutal history of the frontier, a myth born from the unforgivable elements and the deepest human betrayal. Glass was part of General Ashley's expedition, a band of hardened fur trappers pushing deep into the uncharted territory near the Grand River in what is now South Dakota. These men hunted beaver for pelts, living on the edge of starvation and constant attack. But the death that stalked Hugh Glass would not come from a rival tribe or the biting cold. It would come from a beast of pure muscle and fury. One sweltering August afternoon while scouting for game, a chilling silence fell over the dense underbrush. Glass rounded a thicket of willows and found himself face to face with a massive grizzly bear, a sow protecting her two cubs. There was no time for thought, only reaction. The bear exploded into motion, a roaring, monstrous dark cloud. It struck Glass with the force of a falling tree. The first blow sent him sprawling. The second ripped his scalp, peeling skin from bone. The sound of tearing muscle was drowned out by the grizzly's guttural rage. Glass wrestled with the beast, frantically drawing his knife. He stabbed and slashed, fueled by pure, desperate adrenaline, but the bear was relentless. It chewed through his shoulder, crushed his ribs, and tore open his back, leaving a bloody mess of flesh and shattered bone. Finally, the screams of the attack brought his companions running. They found Glass pinned beneath the dying animal, his body utterly ruined, his breathing shallow, wet, and ragged. They managed to dispatch the bear, but the scene was a tableau of horror. Hugh Glass was barely recognizable, his throat ripped open, his legs useless. The leader of the group, Major Andrew Henry, surveyed the damage. Glass was dying. Moving him was impossible. The expedition could not afford to halt its progress waiting for a man to expire. Two men were chosen to stay behind and witness his final moments: a young, terrified apprentice named Jim Bridger and the calculating, opportunistic John Fitzgerald. Their instructions were grim. Stay until Glass dies, give him a proper burial, and then report back. They were promised a hefty bonus for this awful duty. For 3 agonizing days, Glass clung to life, a wheezing testament to an iron will. Fitzgerald and Bridger sat nearby, restless, anxious, and terrified of native tribes spotting their exposed position. They did not nurse him. They did not feed him. They simply waited for the cold silence that would signal the end. But the end did not come. Glass remained trapped in a silent agony, unable to speak, unable to move, fully aware of the sickening resentment growing in the eyes of his appointed guardians. Fitzgerald grew impatient. He saw the bonus slipping away, replaced by danger and endless waiting. He whispered to Bridger, arguing that Glass was already a corpse, merely breathing out of habit. Why wait? They could simply say they buried him. Bridger, young and easily swayed, reluctantly agreed to the unthinkable. As the late afternoon shadows lengthened, Fitzgerald did the unforgivable. He stripped Glass of his rifle, his knife, his axe, and his entire survival kit. Everything a man needed to fight the wilderness was stolen. Then, with a chilling lack of ceremony, the two men dug a shallow pit near where Glass lay. They tossed the stolen supplies into their own packs and vanished into the trees. They left Hugh Glass for the buzzards. They left him in the shallow grave, still breathing, still conscious, watching them disappear, unable to utter a single sound. When the last sounds of their footsteps faded, a terrifying realization settled over Glass. He was alone, surrounded by the vast silence of a place that cared nothing for human suffering. But with that realization came a cold, white-hot fury that surged through his broken body. The pain that immobilized him was now challenged by a singular, consuming thirst: revenge. The first few days were a blur of unimaginable torment. Glass relied on instinct and the sheer will to prove his betrayers wrong. His wounds, infested and stinking, threatened to claim him every hour. He was forced to lie over a rotting log and allow maggots to feast on the dead flesh in his back and shoulders. A desperate, sickening attempt to cleanse the infection. His only movement was a slow, agonizing crawl. With shattered bones and a ravaged body, Glass began the impossible journey. He had to get to Fort Kiowa, the nearest outpost, a sanctuary located over 200 miles away, across terrain riddled with danger. He moved inch by agonizing inch, dragging his ruined legs behind him. He navigated vast plains and sharp ravines, fueled only by water from streams, and the raw meat he managed to tear from the carcass of a bison, left behind by wolves. The lack of salt and the constant fever blurred the line between reality and delirium. Every night was a struggle against the freezing air. Every day a battle against the searing pain that never once subsided. Weeks bled into months. The sun became a tormentor. The rain a temporary reprieve followed by the chill of hypothermia. The wilderness, the same landscape that nearly killed him, became his brutal mentor. He learned to track silently, to hide from potential threats, to drink without detection. His mind was a steel trap, focusing only on the image of Fitzgerald and Bridger. That promise of confrontation kept the flame of life flickering. Finally, after 6 terrifying weeks of crawling, stumbling, and starving, the impossible happened. Glass was discovered by 2 friendly Sioux hunters. They were horrified by the sight of the gaunt, ragged man, a walking corpse barely clinging to life. They recognized the signs of the grizzly attack and the subsequent neglect. They carried him on a makeshift travois for days until they reached Fort Kiowa. When Glass arrived at the fort, he was a ghost, a legend already taking shape. Rumors of his fate had reached the post. Everyone believed he was long dead, buried by the very men who stood to gain from his silence. But Hugh Glass was not silent. He was ready to hunt. He learned that Bridger had been transferred to Fort Union, hundreds of miles to the north, and Fitzgerald had fled, fearful of retribution, heading toward the relative safety of Fort Atkinson. Glass rested only long enough for his major wounds to bind together. He retrieved a weapon and began the final phase of his journey, the pursuit. The man who had refused to die now refused to forgive. Months later, Glass tracked Bridger down at Fort Union. The young man, barely more than a boy, was shaken to his core when he saw the horrifying, scar-faced specter standing before him. Bridger wept, begging for mercy, admitting his guilt, and confessing that Fitzgerald had convinced him. Glass stared at the crying boy, remembering his own desperate crawl across the plains. He realized this young man was merely weak, not truly malicious. Glass could not bring himself to pull the trigger. Revenge exacted upon a frightened child felt empty. He gave Bridger a warning and spared his life. The real target remained Fitzgerald. Glass tracked him tirelessly, finally catching up with him while Fitzgerald was serving in the army, safely ensconced at Fort Atkinson. The confrontation was explosive, but history intervened. Fitzgerald was now under the protection of the U.S. military. Killing a soldier meant execution. Glass wanted revenge, but he wanted to live more. Instead of murder, Glass forced Fitzgerald to return his stolen rifle and the promised $300 compensation for staying by his side. It was a meager, administrative revenge, anticlimactic, yet profound. Glass had forced his betrayer to pay for his survival. Hugh Glass never regained his full health, living the rest of his life scarred and partially crippled. But he became more than a man. He became the embodiment of frontier resilience, a testament to the primal human capacity to endure. He did not die in the wilderness as he was meant to. He died years later, in 1833, killed in an ambush by the Arikara tribe near the Yellowstone River. But his true story, the time he stared into the void of betrayal and crawled 200 miles back to life, remains a terrifying, enduring legend of the West. It is the story of the Revenant, the man who rose from the grave simply because he refused to let his enemies win.